So an issue that we've talked about a lot and that sort of plagues the entire social impact industry is how you measure that impact, how you understand if what you're working on is actually making a difference, and how you then use that impact to help tell your story and get people more excited about your mission. It's a huge problem. A lot of people are struggling with it. Our next speaker, Gaby Brink, has come up with a sort of elegant solution that she's going to talk about.
Thank you, Morgan. Good morning. How are you all doing? I'm excited to be here, my favorite venue in San Francisco. I want to start out with a little story about 6 years ago. I sat in the audience of a conference very much like you are this morning, just a few blocks from here, in fact. And that day, my career took a distinct left turn. This is your left. And it hasn't been the same ever since. There was a talk by Chris Hacker, who was at the time moving from Aveda, where he had accomplished to really integrate sustainability principles into just about every aspect of that business. Of course, not by himself, but they talked about how really 99% of Aveda had sustainability principles really integrated into the DNA of that organization, all the way from R&D to store design and product design and strategy. And he was moving at the time to Johnson & Johnson, which of course is a Fortune 100 company. And he was talking about how if you could just accomplish that same kind of work into 1% of that company, he would have a larger impact. Now, this brought a whole lot of things into focus for me that I had been struggling with in my career as I was kind of looking at the past 10 years of running a successful branding firm and looking ahead at the next 10 years and wondering how I could do something more meaningful. And so at lunch, I ran to the local bookstore and bought Cradle to Cradle and Natural Capitalism and read them over the weekend and was so energized by what I had learned that on Monday morning, I went back to work and sat down with my business partner at the time and said, this is what we need to do. We have to create solutions in this space. We have to apply our creative firepower to this. This is going to really shift how business is done in the next 5 years. And he said, I have a lot of interests, and that's not one of them. So I knew at that moment that we had hit a fork in the road from which there was no turning back. But it took me about another year to really think about what I wanted to do next and really immerse myself in this space and envision a new kind of company. And so a year later, I shut down my firm at the height of its success, and I started over and formed my new firm, Tomorrow Partners. So we have, of course, in the last 5 years, witnessed this transformation in industry. And as businesses have shifted from, really thinking beyond just sustainability and thinking about this idea of creating shared value, which Robert talked a little bit about yesterday. When Michael Porter articulated this idea around shared value, I think companies really finally understood that this is not about CSR. This is really about creating a whole ecosystem of value where not just stockholders benefit, but everybody up and down the supply chain benefits from the existence of an organization. And so finally, I think there's been this recognition that this actually drives economic success for an organization as well. At the same time, in the nonprofit sector, organizations have really realized that market-based solutions are the solutions to large-scale challenges as well. So we have this kind of really dynamic time right now that's happening. And a third player in this, a third actor in this economy for social impact that is really important for us to recognize are the foundations, the funders who support the grantees that are doing the work on the ground. And those funders are actually driving a lot of innovation in this space. And so as we have been thinking about this a lot, we tried to think about how we could create new models to bring grantees into the innovation process. And so this year at Tomorrow Partners, we launched a new division called Tomorrow Labs. So you know that day when I talked about my career taking a left turn. That was really the day when I stopped identifying as a communication designer. And the reason is that I realized that in order to be contributing meaningful things in this space where the challenges are really, really complex, we need to stop just working in the way that is really comfortable to us and that's familiar and that we're good at. We need to really put ourselves into positions where we're comfortable with being uncomfortable, and we immerse ourselves into situations where we co-create and we collaborate. And so at Tomorrow Labs, we bring together, we work with funders, we bring in grantee organizations into this lab process that is not just a week-long kind of experimentation, but is actually a 3-month-long engagement where we work with organizations to map out their day-to-day workflows, their stakeholder ecosystems, and their daily operations. And we work them through a series of exercises to identify pain points in the organizations and barriers that might be barriers to financial sustainability, it might be breakdowns in their systems. Usually by the time we get them to the conversations around those pain points, they say, are we allowed to write a book? And so we then prioritize these challenges against what's most pressing, against what's executable internally with the resources that are available, and ideas that are fundable. So by the time they come into the lab, they actually come in with one defined challenge that we can then iterate against. Now at the lab, something we think is really, really powerful is when these disparate perspectives come together and collide around topics and challenges. And so we bring together doctors and engineers and storytellers, filmmakers, social entrepreneurs, lots of designers, of course. And we have them co-create ideas around these challenges that the organizations bring in. And we really assume that everybody is a designer. And so by the end of the week, we have a pretty tough constraint on this process, which is that they actually have to present their concept to funders that we bring in on the last day. Everybody has to present both the challenge that they have defined, the concept that they have articulated, a potential cost for implementing it, and a roadmap forward. Now, this is a pretty tough constraint for something you're iterating over a 4-day time frame, but it really forces people to focus on articulating their ideas, so by the time they leave the lab, they're really well-versed in taking it back to their internal stakeholders and to potential funders to then move the projects forward. The most rewarding thing we've heard after the labs is that people feel really transformed by how they think about their organizations and how they approach challenges now that they've been exposed to the design process. And so for us, that's obviously very rewarding and exciting to hear how people actually have their mental furniture rearranged after going through a process like this. I'm going to switch gears for a second and talk to you a little bit about what Morgan set up, this idea of impact. And so one of the things we keep bumping up against in conversation is this question of how do we really know that we're creating change? In business, it's easy, right? You can measure dollars. You can measure your ROI and calculate it quite easily. But with impact, how do you actually know that you're progressing when you don't have a common currency? If you're just measuring things like a decrease of infection rates or the rate of deforestation or how many minds you've changed or how much legislation is passed or even cultural shifts. How can we measure this? How can we talk about it? I was at a funders convening a couple of months ago, and we talked about this space in between here, between the data we actually collect and actually gaining insight. And somebody said, that in between there is a lot of guesswork and a whole lot of liquor. And I think it accurately captures the challenge. So when, about 1.5 years ago, our friend Wendy Levy approached us with this idea of actually creating an impact dashboard that she had articulated with the help of a Google 20%er, Eric Deversberger, we were intrigued. And so A year and a half later, after a whole bunch of research and development, we ended up launching a tech venture, which I would have never thought I would be doing 5 years ago when I started Tomorrow Partners. So Sparkwise, I'll just tell you a little bit about it. You know, one of the challenges we've learned organizations face is they have all of their online metrics that they track that, you know, we all have Google Analytics and Facebook Insights. But a lot of the primary data about actual change resides in complicated Excel sheets, and so this stuff is all over the place. And so with Sparkwise, we really wanted to create a dashboard where all of this data can be coming together and laid on top of each other so that you can actually understand and learn from your activities in the online world and on the ground. And then also lay it over potentially open data sets. So imagine you're doing work in Africa to reduce HIV infection rates. You might want to compare how your impact metrics are comparing to, say, the World Health Organization global trends. And so the other challenge is that, you know, there's a lot of impact dashboards in business, but they just have the data move through the dashboard. With us, in the social impact world, you actually have to see long-term trends. And so we really need to be able to collect this data over the long haul. This dashboard that's being built back here is an organization called Barefoot College, which was one of our participants at our lab in May. And they bring grandmothers from places all over the world, from small villages, to India and teach them to become solar engineers. And they go back to their villages and bring electricity to really remote destinations in the world. They hope to be in 45 countries by next year. You can see some of the numbers that kind of tell their story around their impact. But what's of course missing here is, these are just numbers, but these numbers are really all about people and lives, right? And so with Sparkwise, we also realized that storytelling and narrative is so important to capturing impact, especially because we don't have that common currency. And so in the dashboard, you can also embed PDFs and movies and MP3s and all sorts of storytelling devices. And you can then share this with, for example, your funders at the end of a grant cycle. You can publish your data to your website to engage audiences in it and really create a much more meaningful story around your impact. I'm going to show you a little bit the impact of story so that you can get a sense of what this organization does and learn from them firsthand.
Morning class. So 3 parts of solar system. One is photovoltaic solar module. Solar.
ليش بدك تكتب الحال؟ تراعي على اللوحة وتكتبي.
Pass over the 5 Screwdriver. Half an hour complete. Colombia. أنا خلصت. Fast. Yes. Testing.
So I love that clip. So I think you get the idea that you know, data needs to be substantiated by stories, and stories obviously bring to life numbers. And so we really hope that Sparkwise will be useful for all sorts of organizations, both from the bird's eye view all the way down to the worm's eye view. And one of the things about this is you can, as I mentioned, you can publish these boards and embed them in your websites. And each one of these widgets has that little action link at the bottom there. So at that moment, like when you just clapped, when you're moved by what you're seeing, you can actually take an action. So it might say, write to your senator, or call your police department, or make a donation. So really thinking about impact and creating this cycle of engaging audiences and communities and actually making those numbers move. So I want to leave you with, if I can click past this slide, with this incredible image that really inspires me. So I've become somewhat of a data nerd in this endeavor. And does anybody know what these are? These are starlings. It's called a murmuration. Starlings are amazing. They're kind of this giant network where every bird is part of this network, and they move almost instantaneously. It's kind of magical. They don't quite know how it works. It's called a critical system. And so data, to me, is really actually quite sexy and I think can be very empowering in this space. And I think in the next few years there will be a lot of innovation around really empowering organizations around this and creating learning cycles that can really help organizations meet the needs of their communities that they're working to support. And so I want to leave you with a quote. Owen Barter, who is a development economist, once said, as change makers, we don't need to design a better world. We need to design better feedback loops. I believe really strongly that we actually need to do both. And you have the creative firepower to do just that. Use it for good. Thank you.